you so much. So since we are doing an East meets West session here, we're going to start by doing, start by being blinded. We'll start by doing a 1-minute meditation. I call this the snow globe meditation. I'll often do this with my clients at the very beginning of a session. It's truly 1 minute, so don't fall asleep. If you fall asleep, it's okay, but we'll just do this for 1 minute. And you'll hear some noise as people come in and out. Just let that be part of your background noise. So go ahead and close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can choose a space in front of you to just focus your attention and have a soft gaze. And as we're closing our eyes, we're bringing our full attention to this moment. We're going to notice the sounds in the background. We're going to notice our body in the room, sitting on the chair, the feeling of the chair supporting us. Our feet on the floor. And we're going to bring our attention to our breath, just noticing our breath going in and out. And we may choose to imagine in our minds like a snow globe that's been shaken up, that the thoughts and sensations in our body are slowly settling, floating like that snow settling in a snow globe. Using that imagery of our minds and bodies settling to be fully present in this moment. And now coming back into the room and to being fully present with each other. We are delighted to be here with you today. This is one of my favorite topics, is this intersection between the Eastern traditions of mindfulness and meditation and the rich traditions of psychotherapy. We're going to start with a beautiful little example, getting right to the basics with the child.
It's delightful to be with you. We're feeling a little... I'm feeling a little discombobulated talking about this topic, which really belongs to Carrie. She's the Eastern half, I'm the Western half of the discussion today, but we're both trying to integrate. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish today, is to begin to think about how these two very disparate approaches to healing, and that really cannot be integrated, might be still both part of how we think about this process, because they're both so rich. So this is little Jane. Can you read this okay in the back? Is this going to be okay? You've got the handout with all of the slides, so you don't need to worry about taking notes. You can just enjoy our conversation, I hope. This is little Jane. Yes?
Are there any more handouts?
Yes, there are. And here is one right here, waiting with your name on it. Would you pass that back to him?
Appreciate it.
This is not a microphone. This is, okay. Too much technology. I hate technology. I shouldn't be from the West, right? This is little Jane, and this is a real little girl in my life, a little girl I love very much, and whose permission I got to share this. She happens to be my granddaughter, and we have a little journal that we pass back and forth to each other that I found somewhere that's a grandmother and granddaughter's journal. So you can just, it's, free for all kind of thing. It has some questions and some different things. And I write some things in the journal wherever I feel like it, and I mail it to her. And then she writes some things and she mails it back. And the last time she mailed it back to me, she had this in her journal. This is not her picture, but I did get her permission. I said, I want to use this. This is not even her name. This is the name she gave me, but she told me I could say she was her granddaughter. So I'm trying to follow directions here.
HIPAA compliant.
Yes, HIPAA compliance here. Sometimes I feel like if I'm not like everyone else, I'm a bad person. The thing is, I don't want to be like anybody else. What am I supposed to do? And that tugged at my heart, you know, as you can imagine, because I could certainly remember feeling that way when I was 8 years old, and it was not a way I wanted her to be feeling. But I'd like to just approach the topic for a minute. If that were your client coming in the door, how would you want to approach it? What would you do with it? Would you be trying to fix it, or would you be trying to receive it and help her receive it? And those are that kind of captures these two approaches to how people have approached this process of healing. Do we go in and try to analyze it, make sense out of it, figure out what else we could do instead, do that, imagine where it came from in the past, how it's going to be different in the future? Is that the approach that we want to take? Or is it an approach of, let's just sit with this for a minute. Let's just feel this. Let's just notice where you are in your body right now. Let's just notice this feeling and how you know that you're feeling this way. Let's just pay attention to that and just accept that and receive that and say, that's okay. It's all right if I feel that way. It's not killing me. It's not hurting anything. I can just receive that and know that that's just one little part of the vastness of who I am. And I'm sure I'm not saying that very well. For those of you who are into this Eastern stuff, I'm a naive, barely new participant in this who is trying to speak the language, but I don't do as much of this in my current life as Carrie does, so she's the expert on that Eastern approach. But that's what we're trying to kind of get at. So we have some paradoxical assumptions about healing, some different ways that we approach this. On the West, we're talking about we heal through insight into the past and an effort to change and act differently in the future. And in the East, we're looking more at healing through to choosing to face the present moment with embodied awareness and self-compassion. How many of you would characterize yourselves primarily on the West side of this dichotomy, if there is one? How about those of you who would put yourself more on the East, see yourself over there? We have a few experts in East, so please keep us honest here. So we have some stages that people go through. I'm assuming that a lot of you have been exposed to the fix-it sort of model on the left. You have some pretty good ideas about what that includes and what that's like. And if you don't, read the newspaper and you can catch up fast. But we're going to try to expose you a little more to the Eastern side of this and sort of talk about what that looks and feels like, and see then if we can begin to integrate these very different approaches, which can't really be integrated, but we're going to try. A lot of what we're drawing on today is from the top reference on your reference list at the very end, a man by the name of Bruce Tift, who has explored this issue at some length. He is, I think, a marriage and family therapist primarily, and a very fascinating book on some of these issues. So, Carrie, I think we are up to you. So we're on the second handout, the one-page handout that you got out. She's going to go into it in a little more detail.
So these stages are stages that I labeled. These are the very official names of these stages. The stages are shh, ugh, meh, and huh. Now, a respectable clinical researcher would probably balk at these titles, but given that I am working with people in the trenches, I can tell you that this is the vernacular that most resonates with their realities in each of these stages. So we start in this shh stage. The preamble of childhood. This is the stage where the quiet things of childhood are formed. But first, have you ever had the experience of having a new client come into your office and they tell you their presenting problem and you think, yes, I've got this. I just went to a training about this. I totally know what to do. I'm on it. I have ideas about how to help with this. And you give them these really great epiphanies, right, that totally line up with their presenting problem and what they could do. And they kind of shrug and keep going on about their presenting problem. And then you offer this amazing intervention, and they basically ignore it and go back to lamenting over how this presenting problem is not changing in their life. Have any of you ever had that client? That client, yes. You know, clients may recognize that they have problems, but they often don't see it as these presenting problems as a result of their own life strategies or personality styles. So they keep holding on to these ways of approaching the world that aren't really working, and that ends up sabotaging the change that they're coming to you asking for. Now, as therapists, we get this. We understand defensive strategies. We understand personality, rigid personality styles. We understand that, but it's still kind of weird, though, right? I mean, it's people. I don't think surgeons have to put up with this. I think if you come into a surgeon and they're like, "Yes, I see that lump. I know what to do. We will take it off." Then the patient is like, "Good, take it off. That's great." We, as therapists, we don't have that. We have these people coming in saying, "Here's this lump," and we say, "Okay, good. I know how to get rid of that." And they say, "Well, no, let's talk about it a little more. Let's keep thinking about that. Let's keep chatting about that." It's actually a little bit kind of strange. So let's start by talking about the lump. Here is the secret. Our caregivers were not perfect. It's true. And when our needs didn't get met, it felt intolerable. This is the very first box here on your handout. When their shortcomings caused a distressing emotion, it was developmentally appropriate for us to tune out, to check out, to repress that feeling or pretend it wasn't happening. And this doesn't just happen in young childhood, by the way, although psychodynamic therapists often focus on young childhood because that's a foundation for our life experiences that follow. But this can really happen at any stage of life where we experience something that feels intolerable and we can't emotionally hold it anymore. And so we find ways to avoid it. We find ways to check out and ignore it. And we set up the world in a way that allows us to avoid that feeling. But in childhood, we developed the best strategies we could to adapt to our parents' shortcomings and to these stressors that we sometimes found overwhelming. And we created a script of how the world works and who we believe we are in the world. Now, keep in mind that we developed this script before we had any real broad life experience and before our brains were even fully developed. So it's not surprising then that we have flaws in the way we experience ourselves and experience the world around us. Today we see ourselves and our lives through this old lens. The childhood trauma is over, but I love this line, the way we organized ourselves around the trauma persists. And that organizational style, which was effective when we were children, can cause us problems when we're adults. Is everyone following this? This is basic Western psychotherapy stuff, right? And by the way, when I say trauma, we can mean big T trauma, but we can also mean just these small patterns of how our family worked that were not completely functional, that were not completely helpful to our development. So in other words, the strategies we created in an earlier stage of our life kept us from feeling overwhelmed, kept us feeling safe, kept us feeling stable in those primary relationships, but those strategies and ways of viewing the world might be outdated. So we're living in the present with a script that was written in the past. So this is not a rhetorical question now, I want ideas from you. Why would people come to therapy for help and then reject it? Why are these scripts, these old lenses that we see the world through or that our clients see the world through, why are they so sticky? What are ideas about why they're so sticky? Yeah.
The pain of change is more than the pain they're currently experiencing with the behavior.
Absolutely. Did you hear that one? That the pain of change is more difficult than the pain of the behavior that they're trying to change. Yeah.
They're used to getting fixed with a pill or a knife.
Right. Just cut it out. That'd be much easier, right? Maybe if we offered that, we'd get more success, more return rates. Yeah.
Well, the person probably had a couple of decades behind the development of this, and we're going in with just 2 or 3 months of intervention supposed to reverse that.
These are long-standing patterns that have been in place for a long time, and they were based on real pain and real childhood trauma from the child's perspective, right?
A lot of people have fantasies about how therapy works. They think if they talk about the problems, they'll go away.
There's this misconception that if we talk about it long enough, it will somehow disappear, right? Yeah. Other ideas. This thought about the pain that children experience and that is being re-experienced in the present is particularly poignant, that these were not quality of life strategies that children were developing. These were survival strategies. So when that gets triggered, it is not oh, that's an interesting idea. It is really intense sensation that is brought up when these old scripts get reenacted. Yeah.
Sometimes these scripts are not thoughts or stories. They're simply feelings or emotions
Absolutely.
that we really don't have access to.
Yeah. And often those sensations, those feelings, those emotions are very powerful. I've heard clients describe it like it feels like a tsunami. They can't even put words on what it is they're experiencing because it feels so intense. Or sometimes there are words, but it still is connected to very intense emotion that's hard to process, hard to digest. So let me tell you a story about a client. This is a conglomerate, actually, of different clients, but you'll recognize themes. I'm going to call this client Single Susan. Susan is a single LDS woman. She's in her early 30s, and she came to me for therapy complaining that she is socially awkward and that something's wrong with her. And by the way, she was not. She had a professional job. This was not someone on the autism spectrum or anything like that. She had friends. She worked in a professional environment. She presented herself really well. But she said she was awkward. And she presented as significant evidence of her brokenness as the fact that she is single. And she's not married yet. She believes that the most important relationship in your life is your spouse. So honestly, why are we investing in these other relationships? And she meant that very sincerely. Like the most important thing is just that I get married. And after a recent breakup, she was feeling kind of sad, so I suggested that she get involved in some community activities. So she joined a volleyball group. She'd been involved in volleyball in high school, but to help her feel less lonely and feel more connected. But all the other players were younger than her, so she felt like she didn't fit in. Again, that was more evidence to her of her awkwardness. And she laments that if she only was married, she wouldn't have to do things like this anymore, these assignments that I'm giving her. If she was married, she wouldn't have to do these things anymore. And she said to me, I want to be more mindful, but seriously, I can't control my anxiety. So the problem really is I'm not married. I think I'd be less anxious once I'm married. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this mindfulness thing. So I think we need to talk more about my awkwardness and how I can get married before I go to more activities like that volleyball thing. So we have some hints about, I'm honestly almost quoting this conglomerate woman, okay? So we have some hints about her scripts and defensive strategies. What is the story she tells herself about who she is? I'm inadequate. I'm broken. Mm-hmm. The partner will fix it. The marriage partner is going to fix my brokenness, right? What are her misconceptions about mindfulness? Now, how many of you have experience with mindfulness, have a basic understanding? Okay, so we're going to draw on, I'm assuming that we have a basic understanding that mindfulness is about being fully present in the moment with whatever is unfolding. What are her misconceptions about mindfulness? She says, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at mindfulness. I'm just too anxious to be mindful. What are her misconceptions about it?
I'm not the solution.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
She's looking that somebody else is it's impossible for her to be whole in herself.
Yeah, that's another one of her misbeliefs, right? Like, I can't be whole by myself. I need you as a therapist to fix it, or I need, more importantly, frankly, you're a poor substitute therapist. I really need a spouse, right? Yeah, what are her misconceptions about mindfulness, what that means?
Mindfulness is stress producing.
That mindfulness is stress producing. Now, how is that a misconception?
Well, if you know anything about mindfulness, it reduces stress.
It can, yeah.
She sees it as so indirect it couldn't possibly help her with her problems.
She doesn't see a connection, that's for sure, yeah.
Might help other people, but not me.
Not me. I am the one exception, yeah.
She may see it as a way of tuning out from the problem, and so then she'd be ignoring it rather than fixing it. She has to do.
Right, if she goes to volleyball, she actually has to do something, right? And actually, this is not the thing that she's thinking will be helpful. So what does this have to do with it? She doesn't really see a connection. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Her problem is not really, I need a spouse. Her problem is, I think I need a spouse.
There's a thought process going in here, which is based on some script that she's got in her head about how these solutions are going to be solved. Yeah.
It almost seems like she thinks she needs to eliminate all of her anxiety before she can become like,
Oh my gosh, if these cookies were mine, I'd give you one. That's exactly right. That is brilliant. I don't know if people heard that. She believes I have to get rid of my anxiety before I can engage in my life, right?
Once she has a spouse, she realizes that none of those problems are fixed.
We give her the couples therapy card at that point, right? Yeah.
She might be reliving what she was taught from all that.
Yeah, there is certainly, these are very ingrained ways of seeing the world. So it's not necessarily her fault that this is how she's experiencing the world, but it is outdated. This isn't the fullest sense of the world. So one of the early experiences people have with meditation, this is when people first start meditating, meaning they're sitting and practicing meditation in a formal way, or they're practicing that skill of being fully present, that skill of mindfulness in a formal way through meditation. One of the first people are like, oh, I'm so relaxed. Yes, this is just what I needed. I needed to be relaxed. And then often this is what comes up. Oh, I can't stay relaxed. My mind keeps wandering, right? This is the monkey mind phenomenon that we talked to early meditators about. And the idea, what more experienced meditators can attest to is that this monkey mind phenomenon is not a problem, right? The fact that our thoughts are jumping around is the nature of our mind. It's not a problem. So meditation, when you get still and start paying attention to what's going on in your mind, you may not get calm. In fact, you'll probably notice how uncalm your mind is. It's jumping around. The Buddhists use this term monkey. I like to think of it as a dog park sometimes. Like the dog's all jumping around, yapping, right? That our thoughts jump around. And this is also true in our bodies. As we get more aware of what we're experiencing, sometimes that awareness leads us to recognizing more negative sensations that we were distracting ourselves from by not being fully present in our bodies and aware. When I first started practicing mindfulness and meditation, it was about 20 years ago, back in Berkeley. That makes sense, right? It clicks. Shout out to my Berkeley people. But I expected that too, right? I was like, oh, meditation, that's like a relaxation thing. Good, I need to relax. Like I totally need that. And what I realized was the more present I was in my body, the more aware of how much anxiety I was carrying around in my body all the time. Was I always this anxious and I didn't notice it? Basically, yeah. Like when we're really present, we can be aware of sensations that we've spent decades learning how to avoid and not feel. So this young woman, she's talking about, so early meditators assume that the goal of mindfulness is to invoke this state of perpetual stillness and relaxation. And when they try to enforce a state of calm by controlling their mind or controlling their environment, they realize they can't. So this young woman is trying to force a state of well-being by saying, I need to change my circumstances. If I get married, I'll feel internal calm. If I control my anxiety, then my life will feel better. Rather than what a mindful approach would be, which is engaging in your life fully as it is. As it is. The real work of mindfulness is to be compassionately present with whatever is unfolding in any given moment, including those disruptive or unpleasant experiences. So how is she managing her anxiety? She's avoiding it. She's managing her anxiety by not avoiding it. She's claiming that she wants to progress, but she's giving excuses for why she can't progress. She would rather describe her anxiety than actually face her anxiety, right? Than engage in her life in the midst of it. So in the Western tradition, we focus a lot on skill building. We focus on fixing ourselves and on progression. There's nothing wrong with that approach. So the Western traditions and the Eastern traditions don't completely harmonize. They don't blend. They're based on different assumptions, but they complement each other very well. So the Western tradition is based on skill building and fixing ourselves. So in this case, she says she needs to fix her awkwardness before she can go to volleyball. She's justifying postponing being fully engaged in her life until this issue is resolved. But the Eastern tradition, in the Eastern tradition, the solution is not about fixing ourselves, but the work is about staying present and embodied in this moment as it is. So whatever the experience is, whether we like it or don't like it, freedom or wholeness arises from, not from acquiring our preferred lifestyle, not from getting married, changing our status on Facebook, not from changing our state of mind, like not being anxious anymore, getting rid of that. But it's a willingness to stay completely committed to experiencing and engaging in our lives, regardless of the circumstances. Now, if we worked only within the Eastern tradition, we would sort of have this dissolution into the moment without real skill building, which leads to, we end up not progressing in the same way. So we need both of these traditions, in my opinion. We need both of these traditions. They complement each other well. So this is the stage, which doesn't last very long, frankly, because pretty soon you realize that those negative feelings are going to show up. Yeah?
Would it also include accepting where one's at?
Absolutely.
Because I haven't heard you say that word, and I'm just wondering, it's really accepting that it's okay that I'm in monkey mind.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of it. It's being fully embodied and accepting exactly where we are, right? Exactly. And I'm gonna use that word. I'm glad you caught me on that. I'm gonna use that word a lot, actually, as we come up. So the next stage is the stage, which is where these things start to come up. If you sit calm, if you're present enough in your body, you're gonna start to feel this stuff come up, right? So let me tell you about another client. I'm gonna call her Grieving Grace. So Grace presented to me about 3 years after her daughter committed suicide. And after her daughter's death, Grace's mild alcohol use just blew up. It turned into a major, major problem in her life. It also led to drug use and promiscuity. Basically, and this is her words, anything she could do to not feel. And by the time she came to see me, she had been in an inpatient treatment unit for over 1.5 years. And she was actually pretty stable. It might have been even more, like 2 years. She was actually pretty stable by the time she came and started working with me. But she was scared because these memories of her daughter were coming up. And honestly, they were sweet. They were benign memories. She had this memory of going shoe shopping with her little girl, you know. And just the tenderness of that, of these memories of being with her daughter. And she remembered how soft her little girl's hand was, you know. Just these little memories were coming up for her, but it was terrifying to her because then it provoked this grief that had led her into every imaginable way to avoid feeling possible that she was just now getting stable from. These memories were really scary. So what should she do? What should she do? This is the stage, right? Basically what you hear clients say in this stage is, all right, I'm trying to be present, I'm trying to be mindful, but what's happening right now really sucks. Like, I don't like what I'm feeling, I'm stuck, I'm in these behaviors and these relationships or this mindset that is not working for me, so what am I doing wrong? What is Grace doing wrong? Thoughts?
Has to feel her feelings.
The feelings actually aren't wrong, right? The fact that she's feeling this is not a problem. It's the avoidance of the feeling that's the problem, right? As we become more present, we may not feel more relaxed. We may feel more aware of these negative feelings. It's pretty obvious how Grace avoided being fully present. She used alcohol, she used these other things. But that avoidance is actually more of the problem than the feelings themselves. So her work at this stage is to learn how to hold the feelings, to dance with that grief in a new way rather than avoid the grief to begin with. We can see that Grace avoided being present with alcohol use maybe even avoided being present by staying in therapy a really long time, working on the alcohol use so she didn't have to work on the grief, right? What are other ways people avoid being fully present? What are other things you've seen clients do to avoid full presence in their experiences?
Being overly busy.
Busyness. That's a beautiful one, especially for our high-functioning clients, right? Like, you get a lot of praise and reward for being very busy. I don't have to feel any of that if I'm busy. What other things do people do to avoid being fully present?
Retell their story.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Did you hear that one? I'll tell it to you again. They retell their story over and over and over and over again. It's actually a way of avoiding the feelings of being fully present in their life, right? Until I'm fixed, I can't really be fully present in my life. So the way to avoid being fully present is to never get fully fixed. I'll keep reiterating the story. What are other ways people avoid?
If they're a victim, they don't have to be responsible, so it goes along with it.
Yeah, if I'm always broken, I'm always a victim, and it's always someone else's fault, I don't really have to be fully present and engaged. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I've got a case where the present is pure hell, and so they stay out of the present because the present is worse than anything else.
Yeah, so how do they avoid the present? How do they avoid that? Disassociation. You basically can't be fully if you're going to avoid, you're disassociating in some way, right? Like you're checking out of your body in some way, absolutely. Others, ways of avoiding. Complaining, that is a way of avoiding, which when I read that one, I was like, oh, that's good to know. When I'm complaining, I'm not actually fully engaged in my life. I'm kind of here, but I'm kind of not here because I'm complaining, so I'm not really in it, right?
Self-medicating?
Absolutely, self-medicating with medications or drugs or alcohol, yeah.
When they come to you and you're like poor therapist they've seen in the last 6 months because others didn't know what they're doing. Because they don't want to work.
Yeah, because they don't really, because to really get engaged would mean actually feeling and working through the feelings. So I'm just going to therapy shop so I can keep complaining, right? Someone else, yeah.
The old blame game.
Yes, I'm going to blame others. I'm going to complain about others.
Where I was raised, how I was raised, or
yes, and if I can be blaming others, I have the excuse to not be fully present and engaged in my life as it is, right? Recruiting, tell me about that.
If I recruit you as my therapist to be on my side, then I'm probably resting alone.
Yeah, we'll both be in denial about that. We'll both be. Absolutely, and we can be pulled into that as therapists, that we're actually allowing our client to avoid going to the volleyball game. Oh, you're right, you shouldn't go to the volleyball game. Let's talk about your anxiety more, right? Like we can get caught up in that too. Staying in ambivalence is a way of avoiding. Meditation as a relaxation strategy is a way of avoiding, right? I don't want to feel that, let's meditate so I can check out, in a sense, instead of really using meditation the way it is intended, which is to be more fully present. As we practice staying mindfully present in our life, the feelings of void will become more visible. And these feelings and stories have been there all along, but we've gotten really good about finding ways to avoid them. And those out-of-date strategies can create more problems than they actually solve. So the work is to stop avoiding intensity and expand our capacity to hold it. The work is not to get rid of messy life experiences. The work is not to get rid of intense feelings, but we have to expand our capacity to hold intensity and stop trying to avoid it, to accept ourselves in our lives as it is unfolding in this moment. So if grief was the problem with Grace, then the solution would be to get rid of the grief. But if avoidance of grief is the real problem, then we can stay and learn how to dance with that grief and have a relationship with it in a new way. And that's where the Eastern tradition comes into place. Kind of like a child who avoids opening the closet because they're afraid of the monster in the closet. But once they open the closet, they realize there's nothing that's going to harm them. We can be afraid of these intense feelings, so afraid that we don't want to open the closet. But avoiding opening that closet actually ends up creating more problems for us than just opening the closet and feeling our way through the feelings, realizing feelings aren't going to harm us. They're not going to actually hurt us. As you had mentioned, intensity in its most basic form is sensation in our body. So to avoid intensity, we disconnect from our body or check out. So the work is to get back into your body, to name the raw physical sensations you're experiencing. This is the work that you'll do with clients, is prompting them to get out of the story that they're telling in their head and that they're complaining to you about and come back into their actual physical body. What are the raw sensations you're experiencing? I feel heaviness in my chest. These are going to be neutral, generic experiences that everyone experiences. When it starts to get more personal, you know that you're going into the story and not into their bodies. I feel tight. I feel nauseous in my stomach. I feel tearfulness. I feel tightness in my shoulders. These physical sensations are those physical sensations are the most real thing that's present in the moment, because our stories are distorted. So that's less true than the actual physical sensations, which are the most true thing that's happening in the moment. So that's why we come back to them and we get grounded in those. So the trigger itself means nothing. It's just something that happened. That has no meaning until we put a story on that trigger. And those stories are not really based on this moment. They're often based on past conditioning. So they're distorted and not fully accurate. Much of what we're judging as negative and intolerable is based on sensations and thoughts that are part of that story. And if we stayed with the raw physical sensations in our body, it passes. So this is on your handout too. I love this quote. Embodied awareness is not so much about increased awareness of the body as it is about relaxing into awareness as it is being experienced through the body. That's the next one. So this idea, it's not about focusing, it's not about awareness of the body, it's about experiencing our full awareness through the sensations of the body. Practicing being fully present with what is. So we're practicing, meaning we're consciously participating in reality. We're consciously participating in reality, giving ourselves full permission to experience what is here in this moment. So then we get to UG. This is the UG stage. Again, really we're doing this again. As we go through this cycle of I'm triggered, these sensations and thoughts come up, I hold them and I lean into them, I get out of the story and into my body, those sensations, that emotion, that intensity will dissolve. As you go through that cycle over and over and over again, I'm triggered, thoughts and sensations come up, I get out of the story in my head, I get into my body, the sensations dissolve. As you go through that over and over and over again, for Gracie with grief, for Susie with her anxiety, you start to see like, oh yeah, this keeps coming up for me over and over, right? That we see our same stories reappearing over and over. And it can actually you can even start to feel kind of bored by it. Like, oh my gosh, I've seen this movie 1,000 times. Like, this is the same story that keeps coming up. It's kind of like seeing a scary movie. The first time you see it, it's shocking and you're surprised by it. But by the time you've seen that same scary movie 1,000 times, it still may be sort of disturbing, but it's no longer so shocking. And deep down, you know, I can handle this. I can handle this scary movie. So at first, these stories that are in our head are so real that they're all we can see. But as we create more space around the stories, they start to take perspective. They don't go away necessarily, but they're not so all-encompassing. So like the story of I'm awkward. When we have that story, so my client has a story in her head, she's got it so close to her that everywhere she looks, all she sees is her awkwardness, right? But if you create some space between the story that you're holding and some space between it, I still see the story of awkwardness, but I also see everything around it. I can see it more in perspective. Part of the work of Eastern tradition is learning to hold still and create space around the story so that we can see it with a little more space and it's not so all-encompassing. Another analogy that I'll use with clients is that these emotional experiences, these sensations are like the weather. Weather has no personal meaning. Weather doesn't, just because it's stormy doesn't mean I'm bad or I'm worthless. Just because these emotional sensations are going through you doesn't mean that you're unsafe or that you're unlovable or that you're not enough. It's just emotion, it's just sensation going through you. So it's not a math problem to be solved. It is a thunderstorm to be observed. You don't have to fix this. You don't have to solve it. There's nothing wrong to be solved. This is just something to observe and let pass. Doesn't mean it's not noisy or disruptive or annoying sometimes, but it's nothing to fix. It's a thunderstorm to be observed. At the raw sensations, there's no real problem. Raw sensations are not personal. They don't mean anything, and they pass. Challenging the validity of our old stories with new interpretations is less effective than challenging the story with embodied present awareness. In other words, you can't think your way out of these old scripts. You have to feel your way through them. So one way we can do that is to slow the movie down and look at it in still frames rather than in seeing it as one fast movie that tells the story of my life. Looking at it as one frame at a time. This is the one thought that I'm having. This is one physical sensation that I'm having. As we slow it down, we have more flexibility about how to see it and work with it. Another client. This, oh wait, yeah. Hold on. Yes, so another client, this is Laura. Laura is a 50-year-old LDS woman. She's married. She has 4 children. She has fibromyalgia and a bunch of food sensitivities that are hard for her to manage. And she describes a theme in her life of feeling lonely and invisible. And that continues in her family of origin. It continues at church. So she talked about that story can be triggered really easily for her, this story of I'm lonely and I'm invisible. So her ministering sister asked her how she was doing. Laura started telling her about the fibromyalgia. And the ministering sister said something that Laura took as very dismissive and unhelpful, something to the effect of, oh, I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Let me know when you feel better. Here's some cookies that you can't eat because of your food sensitivities, right? So Laura took that as evidence of being invisible. And she felt really lonely, and she's had that going on over and over and over. And so she led to the conclusion, what's the point of going to church if nobody really cares? Like, what's the point if I'm invisible there? And as she describes that, she's very emotional. She's very sad. I mean, this is not just a theoretical idea for her. This feels like deeply wounding to her. So thumbs up or thumbs down, yes or no? Do you think the Eastern approach would encourage Laura to avoid her trigger and cut off contact with the ministering sister? Yes or no? The Eastern approach. Avoid the trigger. Yes, avoid the trigger, or no, don't avoid the trigger. You got to face it. Exactly. We got to face it. We got to accept it. Right? The goal is not to get rid of triggering things or to get rid of things that make us feel upset. We have to stay present with those things. Okay. And it's not possible. I've tried avoiding all my triggers. It doesn't work. They keep coming up. Like, you can try to do that. Like, go for it. Try and avoid all your triggers. If you can figure out a way to do that, then you're going to become a very wealthy therapist. Okay, so thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up if you think the Eastern approach would be to encourage her to work on changing her feelings towards the ministering sister by thinking more rationally about the situation. For example, try and see things from the ministering sister's point of view. Yes or no? Yeah, no. We don't need to avoid intense sensation. Feeling intensity is not a threat. It's part of being conscious and human. So we don't have to try to convince her that she's not seeing it rationally. Okay. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you think the Eastern approach would encourage her to distract herself when she feels lonely like this by going for a walk or engaging in a pleasurable activity? Is that what the Eastern approach would do? Yes or no? No. We're not going to distract ourselves from these emotional intense experiences. We're going to go through them. The intensity is a sign of being conscious and human. I like that line. You're feeling this is not a problem. It's a sign of you being conscious and human. All right. Would the Eastern approach encourage her to analyze where in her history did this story of loneliness originate, and then challenge the story and give a new interpretation? Is that the way the Eastern approach would handle it? No. Okay. We don't need to analyze our stories or create new interpretations. That's just another way of staying and complaining and staying out of it, right? All right, well, we know what it doesn't do. So how would a therapist practicing this Eastern approach work with Laura? What would an Eastern approach be in the work with her?
What's that story of the bear hunt where they're saying like, thick, ooey gooey, oozy mud or something? They go, we can't go over it, we can't go under it.
Oh my gosh, that's great. We have to go through it. We have to go through it. So how would you as a therapist go through it with Laura? What would you encourage her to do in this moment as she's telling you her lonely story and she's feeling sad and she's crying?
What part of your body are you feeling this sensation?
Beautiful. Come back to your body. Where are you noticing the sensations in your body? Now, sometimes you'll get someone saying something like, I feel lonely. That's not actually a sensation in your body. Where in your body do you feel the loneliness? I feel it, often people will say, I feel it in my chest, right? Where in your body are you feeling this loneliness? Exactly. Other thoughts? I'll use the analogy of this, that we got to create some more space between this, and the analogy of slowing it down. If you have dominoes that are put out on a room in a pattern, and you hit one domino, the dominoes go down, and your brain takes in the whole pattern of how the dominoes are falling. But if you create some more space between each of the dominoes, set them in the same pattern. So let me go back. The dominoes are an analogy for our thoughts and feelings that create this theme in our life, right? Oh, the ministering sister brought me cookies. I'm not supposed to have cookies. She knows that. I feel lonely. I have this I feel sick in my stomach. I feel this heaviness in my chest. I have the thoughts going through my mind that nobody cares about me. I'm invisible. I have an urge to not go to church because why go if nobody cares? The dominoes are spinning really fast, right? And then this whole theme, this global theme of I'm invisible and lonely is what her mind is taking in. If you spread the dominoes out and you just click one domino falls. That's it. I feel intensity. I feel heaviness in my chest. That's it. Let's slow down the dominoes. And as you slow down the dominoes, you start to get more perspective. They're still there. That feeling is still there. The sensations, the thoughts are still there, but we have more perspective on them. We can see them in context. We have the bigger context for what we're experiencing. So yes, go back into your body. The next is meh. Been there, done that. So we get practice with this. We can ride this wave of intensity, even when it's very intense. We expect intense experiences to arise, so we stop trying to avoid them. We don't feel compulsively driven to avoid them or to react in any particular way. And we're less engrossed by the story that we're telling ourselves regarding the sensations. The story still comes up, but the question isn't so much what's in my history that initiated this story, so much as what am I doing right now to maintain this drama when I don't have to? So it's a different set of questions. One moment in my life where I felt like I handled this pretty well, where I just rolled with it, where I just felt it. I was going through a divorce. I had been going through the divorce for a couple of years. It was awful. I went to lots of therapy. I did lots and lots of complaining and ruminating and like avoiding in all ways possible, right? But then it culminated, so everything I'd worked for towards my adult life, my job, my marriage, my house, like all these things that I'd worked towards, like I was leaving all of them. I was gonna move away, leave all of it behind. And I was sitting in the car in the driveway, about to go with a friend of mine, and I just had this huge rush of just sadness and grief and anger and tearfulness, and it just flooded me, right? But I knew it. I didn't need to talk about it. I didn't need to analyze it. I just needed to feel it. And I sat there for a couple minutes. I bawled my head off. I let it roll through me. A few minutes went by, and I put the car in reverse, and I left. Like it didn't have to be analyzed. It didn't have to be. There was no story that it didn't have to mean anything. I could just experience that thunderstorm going through me and then let it go. The mess stages, yeah, been there, done that. I've seen this movie 1,000 times. I can do this. I can do this. And then we get to this final stage, this stage. We have appreciation and curiosity towards each moment that shows up. And whatever that moment's hold without any agenda. Now the Easterns say we expand our awareness so much that we're aware that we are awareness itself. that like messed with my head. I was like, I don't know how to make sense of that. How are you awareness yourself? Anyway, so there's an analogy that worked really well for me to help understand this idea of being able to just hold anything that comes up and expand our capacity to hold it. If you think of the negative experiences we have, the triggers, the stories that we tell ourselves about the blame and the hurt and the pain that we've experienced, if you think of that as a poison, a little vial of poison, if you drink that poison straight up, you're going to feel sick. You're going to feel overwhelmed, you're going to feel flooded, you're going to want to avoid, right? But if you take that same vial of poison and imagine that you take it and put it in this huge freshwater lake, and you put that poison in there and it spreads out in that, it dissolves into that huge freshwater lake, and you take the same amount, the same size vial, and drink out of that lake, it's not going to make you sick. So the idea is that we're practicing expanding our capacity to be that lake, right? That I'm not just going to hold this experience in this tiny little hand and then be burned by it and feel sick. I'm expanding my capacity to hold whatever life experiences come up for me, whatever triggers, whatever even my story is about these triggers. I'm expanding my capacity to hold it, so that in the end, I am awareness itself. I am the lake, and I can hold it. And in a sense, I think of God as like the biggest lake possible, right? He's holding all of it. He's holding the joy, he's holding the pain, he's holding our individual suffering, he's holding our collective suffering across generations. He's holding all of it. He's expansive enough to hold all of it. And as we, in LDS language, like become part of the vine and connect to him, our capacity to hold expands as well. That's an interesting idea to me too, as I've been getting into more peace activism work. I very strongly felt prompted by by the Spirit. I take it as a prompting. Who knows? I could be delusional. It's true. It could happen. It's probably. But the prompting, the feeling I had was, if you're going to do this work, if you're going to engage in helping people who are suffering, which we as therapists do, you have to expand your capacity to hold suffering. And this is we're trying to do this as therapists, and we're also trying to do it on behalf of our clients, helping them expand their lake, expand their capacity to hold their suffering.
So a little way of approaching this that kind of combines a little more of a Western analytical style, perhaps with a little more Eastern style. Just for you to practice, what is a recent story or drama that you have become preoccupied with right now in your life? What's a little story going in your life in the last week or so that's like, yeah, that's one of those things that I just get stuck in? And it could be anything as mundane as my wife leaves her socks on the floor. I'm sure there are wives who do that. I don't know any, but I'm sure there are. But to something, that you're just locked into an old script that you've played 1,000 times, but when it grabs you, it just rips at your heart. It could be any in that range. Something around blame or deserving or victimhood or any of those things. If you enter that story right now, if you can, what raw feelings come up? Now, there are two ways that we use that word, feelings. Some of them are on this list right here. All kinds of negative feelings like disappointed or unwanted or stressed or powerless. We also have some positive feelings on the board that are part of intensity for us. Why would people get avoidant and intense about feeling excited? Why would they get avoidant and intense about feeling attractive or powerful or masculine or smart? Yeah, you've got all the answers today, so everybody listen very carefully. No, I mean really good answers. So, please, Joshua.
I think joy is probably one of the most vulnerable emotions that we have. And
why is that vulnerable?
It's we're kind of exposing ourselves to the likelihood that life can be good and we can find happiness. And without the anxiety of it's going to be stolen and taken away from us.
Okay, so one of the reasons some of those positive emotions can just be really hard, even though they seem like they should be the desirable thing, is they set us up in a vulnerable place to have them ripped away and to be disappointed, to be left, to find out we were wrong, to feel betrayed. So they can very quickly take us back over to the other side, right? Sometimes we don't even know what the feeling is that we're feeling in this sense of feeling. But sometimes it's helpful to have a list to kind of look at and say, yeah, I think I'm feeling just exposed is the one that is coming to my mind right this minute for some reason I can't explain. Please.
That word safe. Sometimes we say, oh, finally I'm in a safe place. And then it changes.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's
And there's almost nothing that's scarier for us than thinking we finally got this and then finding out we were wrong. Because it takes us right back to what we were expecting all along and trying to convince ourselves wasn't real. But then we find out it is. Have you had that happen with clients in therapy where you're like, let's try, this story you've been on so far, you kind of run up to the limits of how far you can go with that story. You've hit a wall here. Let's try a different approach. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who had all kinds of reasons for being very anxious in life. And so she was constantly trying to make sure nothing could go wrong so that she wouldn't, that was how she was dealing with her anxiety. It was lots of protective stuff to make sure nothing could go wrong. And I said, this is great, but it just seems like you live your life almost so anxious trying to make sure nothing is going wrong that it's not any worse than the anxiety that you're trying to defend against and you're trying to protect yourself from. She said, well, what do I do instead? Well, I don't know. How about you just let things go wrong sometimes? Well, I can't do that. Well, let's try it. Let's just try it. Just see. And the immediate place she tried it for a little while and then something went wrong. And she's like, see? Something goes wrong. And I'm like, yeah. And then you live with it. You find out it's not the end of the world. Well, that was completely mystifying to her. What are you talking about? So these kinds of feelings are one of the ways that we think about feelings. The other way that we think about feelings, as Carrie was talking about, is just what is the raw feeling in my body? How many of you could connect with that feeling when I asked you 2 minutes ago? Were any of you were like, I have no idea. I'm often one of the no idea people. I'm like, feeling I'm supposed to be feeling, I feel nothing, And yet I know there's got to be something there because I'm like, in some really intense emotional state. But I've gotten pretty good at dissociating from some of those intense emotional states. So sometimes we have to do some of the things that Carrie was talking about of just, what do I feel in my hands? Can I feel my hands? Can I feel my feet? What do I feel? A little pressure on the body. Okay, let's just start there. And with clients who've been through a lot of trauma, a lot of difficulty in their life, you may spend 6 months just reminding them to feel their hands and feet and letting them get solid there and comfortable there before they figure out what some of those other emotions are, some of those other feeling states are that are in other parts of their body that are connected to other things. I'm remembering a client I had years ago who was panicking about a trip she was going to take. She could not for the life of her figure out why this trip was so scary. And I said, well, what kinds of things have you done that are unusual in preparing for this trip in response to that fear? And she gave me a whole list of things, and I'm like, oh, well, it sounds like something, went really wrong somewhere. She went home, was sitting there thinking, why did I do those things? What was that about? And began to remember, not in her head, but with her body, a whole bunch of physical experiences that left her running to the bathroom, spitting in the sink for reasons she had no idea why. Except that there began to be some images that came with those physical feelings of I have to get up, I have to run, I have to spit in the sink, that made her realize I'm remembering sexual abuse that happened when my parents were on a trip like the one I'm about to take. That happened when she was 5 years old, that she had no memory of. But her body was coming up with these feelings. So when she sat with her body by itself without any other expectations other than what am I feeling, there was a lot in there. So we have to be a little careful sometimes about giving our clients a safe and grounded place, a safe place to come back to when we are inviting them into their body, if we have some inclination that maybe their body's not a safe place, okay? Okay, so what does all this have to do with relationships and belonging? And the very simple reality is that it's relationships probably 98% of the time that trigger us, isn't it? Once in a while, it might be because, we skinned our knee, or we had to go to a doctor with an illness, or we saw smoke coming out of a smokestack or something like that. But most of the time, what triggers us is in relationship, because relationship is who we are as human beings. It's what we do. It's where we learn. It's how we grow. It's where we get hurt. It's where the good things and the bad things happen to us. We are just such social animals that this is primarily where this stuff gets triggered. And so that's why relationships are so often what we're bringing in, or the absence of relationships is so often what our clients are bringing in to talk to us about, because this is where we get stuck. So I had Jane at the beginning. Now we're at Lisa and Roger. You can see, I think I captured the right picture to get these people a little bit. Real people. I can't be the person he wants. He wants someone to take care of him, to have the perfect kids, the perfect house. He wants a wife with no opinions. He doesn't even care if I'm hurt. I just don't make him happy. What's somebody going to do about this? Is kind of the look on her face. Really, I have to put up with this. What's he thinking on his side? My kids, my wife, they're always sick. They're always upset about something. They're never the ones who excel or make me feel like my sacrifices are worth it. She's critical, controlling. I'm tired of all the drama. I want out. And you can see him already physically leaving. So that they're physically representing for us a little bit of their stories here. So what do we do? Do we fix it? Or do we receive it? And I know my tendency as a therapist is to sort of want to jump in. Let's see if we can fix this. Let's see where it connects to the story of the past. Let's see how we can make the story different in the future. And I'm really grateful for the reminder. Sometimes let's just slow down. Let's put a little space between this physical reality, this trigger, and the next domino in the pile. See if we can spread them apart a little bit and just stay with this for right now, with what's going on right here and right now. So we've got our little domino guy here. These current feelings then trigger these old stories, and these old stories are often about what we deserve and what we cannot stand, right? What life owes me, what I should be able to get, if I could just figure it out, what I should have, and what I can't tolerate. And the story of how we can't, of what other people's behavior is making us feel in one of those regards, or what this particular feeling means about us. I got really confused reading some of the Eastern stuff for a while because they kept talking about no sense of self. You don't have a self. There's no such thing as a self. And I'm like, I have no idea what you mean by that. And I finally kind of got that at least my reading of some of that is, one of the ways of understanding that is, your story is your sense of self. And this is getting out of the story of what you deserve, what's happened to you, who you are, what you can't tolerate, putting the story aside for a while and just saying, what's real right now in this present moment? Can I stand this? And what we generally find is, yeah, I cry for 3 or 4 minutes and then it passes. I grieve like crazy. I'm falling down on the floor. I've had those moments where I'm just bawling so hard I feel like it will never pass. I'm in a rut I hold so deep I wonder if I will ever get out of it. And 10 minutes later, I stop. If I just don't try to put all this other stuff on it, but just stay with the feeling. That doesn't mean it won't come back. But as she has explained to us, every time we go through that iteration of it coming back again, it gets a little less intense. It becomes, after a while, oh, here's that story again. Here's that feeling again. Here's the old drama back again. So what's triggering that right now? That's useful. Okay, so let's just sit with that for a minute. Ah, yes, grief. Ah, yes, stomach churning. Ah, yes, tears. And then, okay, I can go on. So, what does this look like in a relationship? We see some of these same things that she was talking about. The preamble of childhood is still there. It's still doing the same stuff. We're still organizing the world around the past to some ways as we get into the present. We have a handout on this one as well that you can pick up afterwards, but I'm not going to put it out now. Then we get into this early relationship, let's say in a loving relationship. Those are the ones that seem to cause us the most problems. We assume that, oh, I have finally met the person who makes me feel loved and cared for. This is wonderful. My old problems are finally going to be solved. The hope of finally being loved and understood is here. We get each other. Everything's great. We go with that for a while. There's some little moments, but we kind of put those on hold when they don't match the script in our heads, or we get really mad about them for a while, but then if we're lucky, we work them through and we think, oh, I was wrong. It's going to be great. Right? And so we get going, but the work has only just begun, of course, as we know. So those negative feelings, that intensity, we begin to get more and more going around that because, of course, what was his name? Is he in here? Yes, you, presenter, right there. What was the name of that therapy again? Restoration therapy. Get his stuff from this morning if you didn't go to it. It was fabulous. It was great. A really beautiful integration of mindfulness and self-soothing. And what's the third thing on your list? Attachment, absolutely. Beautiful integration of those in some stuff that he was presenting from Hargrove. Okay. Hargrave? Hargrave, thank you, Hargrave. Beautifully done. So we become more and more frustrated with the disconnect between our old story of what we deserve and can't stand and the reality of what's really going on. And that codependency and blame gets really hot and flourishes instead of the connection and separation of real intimacy. Connection and separation are both parts of intimacy, aren't they? It's not just the connection part. We all have to have separation parts in our intimacy as well. And one of the ways we think about codependency is when people can't tolerate the separation part that is essential to intimacy. Even think about that in your relationship with the Lord. He goes away and he comes back. He goes away, he comes back. Matter of fact, that's how we learn object constancy in the first place, isn't it? That the ball goes away, we cover it up, and it comes back. Oh, it's still there. Amazing. Well, people go away and come back. The Lord goes away and comes back. Feelings go away and come back. We go away and come back. We need both. It's part of that growth process. So Tift's definition of codependency, tell it to me, Carrie. You had it memorized. What's codependency? Do you remember?
Oh, God.
You said you were telling me this at lunch.
I feel anxiety right now in my body. I don't remember.
It's like a routinized way, right? A routinized or a ritualized way. What was his definition? I know this too. It's a ritualized way of managing the separation and connection part of intimacy so that you don't have to do the real work of separation and connection that makes you feel vulnerable. So you create this ritualized way of sort of managing how this relationship is going to go, what it's going to look like. We create this little drama, this little story that actually makes it feel a little more containable because it's predictable. We know our part, we know your part, we know how it's gonna go, you're gonna mess up, I'm gonna be mad at you, we're gonna scream about that, you're gonna leave, I know the story. We create this ritual around it instead of actually dealing with the reality of what it's like to connect and feel vulnerable and to separate and feel independent. That's what real intimacy is about. And when we're trying to hide ourselves from that, we project all of our internal tensions onto our partner, which, brother, what's his name again? Tell me your name again that presented this morning. Ed, which Ed talked about this morning so beautifully. We put all of this onto the partner, and they in turn trigger us, and we get this whole big complicated thing going again. So we complain instead of engaging in honest conflict and growth. And then we get sort of bored with that same old drama. We get tired of this, and we usually at this stage pull into sort of withdrawal period instead of fighting. We start to fight less because the fighting doesn't really do much good, and we don't like it very much after all. And so we just start to withdraw. We just kind of get tired of the old drama. We still think it's kind of the other person's fault, but maybe we're starting to imagine, well, I'm not fixing them. So maybe it's not any easier to fix myself or than to fix them, but at least it's something I have control over. I have no control over what he's doing over there. I don't like having to fix me either, but at least that's something I might have a chance of getting someplace with, because I'm not getting any place otherwise. And then finally, we get a little more, if we keep growing, we keep trying, we keep centering, we keep looking back into our own experience, our own feeling state, our own raw, just where we are, without putting all the story on it. The intensity comes up, but we feel a little less compelled to avoid it or withdraw from it. We realize, yeah, I guess I can be resilient when something goes wrong. I don't have to just prevent it, as my anxious friend was trying to figure out. I guess I can just grieve when the grief comes up, and I don't drop into a bottomless pit that I never get out of. It actually begins to dissipate after a little while, as long as I don't compound it with all of this extra story of the whole loss of my life and how I'm never going to be happy again, and I never have been happy anyway, and all of those other things. The feelings don't have to be fixed or gotten rid of before I'm free to engage with this other person in a more authentic way. And so I begin to see options to the drama that we've been engaged in. And if we're lucky, I'm not just one person in a field with a happy face in my wheelchair, but maybe we can be two broken people who can still find pleasure in the moment, in whatever it is, realizing that, yeah, it sucks to be in this wheelchair. I don't like it. But in this moment, right now, I'm just sitting in this room looking out at the Plaza Hotel and the smokestacks in the temple, and it's a pretty day, and there's a bigger lake here than just me and my wheelchair. There's a whole world going on here with the potential for connection anytime I want it by just tuning in to someone else. If you wanted to connect right now, could you do it? How would you do it? Yeah.
Be present.
Be present with what?
With the other person.
Okay.
And with yourself.
So you could turn to Marlene and say, tell me about your life. Tell me about your world. What's going on with you? You could get curious and present with someone else that you don't even know. Anytime you want, right? You could remember in your relationship with your spouse or your friend moments of affection and warmth between you. You could pay attention to that part of the story instead of the horrible part of the story. You could get curious about someone else's life. You could really listen. You could share. That's always available to anyone in this room anytime we want it, right? What about separateness? Is that always available? When you start to feel smothered, controlled. My wife is trying to control me. She's smothering me. My husband doesn't do what I say. Can we get separateness anytime we want it? How do we do that? We can meditate. We can say, I need a break. I need some time. I got to go get myself together here. I'm getting really lost. I need to go just sit and be quiet. We can ask for help with something we want help with. We can create a boundary on something we need a boundary with. These are the honest ways to create both connection and separation. To be curious and invested in someone else, or to say, I need 10 minutes. Actually, I need 3 weeks. I'm leaving for 3 weeks, but I will be back, I promise. But I really need some concentrated time. I told my husband once I was leaving for a week. He had he was panicked, and I said, no, really, I'm not leaving you. I need to go sit in the forest by myself for a week. I really need to do this. He was sure I was not coming back, and it was nothing like that, But we need to. Sometimes right now, I have a hard time even thinking what the boundary would be that I would ask for. What would be the little request I would make? What would be the boundary that would be helpful to me? It's sometimes hard to know. Okay. So, in the West, on the fixed side, we have a whole bunch of relationship tools. These are familiar to you. These are things that I have used, you have used. This is all the research that supports this from Gottman and Hendricks and all kinds of other people, Johnson, things that we can do to help people fix their relationships. And these are valuable and they're helpful. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. There better not be, because I don't know how to do anything but this most of the time. But there's some other ways that we can look to the Eastern sort of approach a little more. One of them is to simply commit to stopping all complaining. Like for a month. Just say every day for a month, and if I complain, I have to start over. I am not going to complain. I am going to honestly ask for a boundary or some help, for some connection or some distance. I'm going to do that I'm going to have conflict that needs to be had with integrity, but I'm not going to complain. I think this would kill me. I think I'd last 2 hours, but I think I get it. That it takes me out of this victimhood, blaming kind of story that I get to go around in about how busy I am and how hard my life is and how difficult things are, and gets me back to just honesty that may take a while to get to. We can ask for breaks when we're emotionally triggered, and in the middle of a conflict, that might really need to be, I got to go calm myself down. I'm getting really triggered here. I will be back. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow when you get home from work? Tomorrow when the kids leave for school? Can we continue this then? But right now, I got to go figure out what's happening with me and take a break. That kind of break will often work when I got to get out of here. Will not. Okay? Facing anxiety about having to feel unpleasant feelings, as Carrie said, is never convenient or comfortable. Never. I do this one all the time. The way it looks in my life is, but I've had a really hard day and I deserve this chocolate right now. And I don't want to deal with my feelings right now. After things have calmed down and everything is better in my life, then I will deal with chocolate, right? That's one of the ways that it works for me. And so in the moment, I keep going back to the same old story. And that's when I'm beginning to realize, okay, I gotta have the courage to sit and figure out what I'm feeling right now while I'm feeling it, and avoiding it by doing something that I know in the long run is not helpful for me.
We're at 5 minutes.
5 minutes, perfect. So tuning into the body and the feelings, receiving them with compassion, recognizing those paradoxical and competing feelings of closeness and separateness, and then beginning to trust that we will know how to handle what comes up in this same self-compassionate, self-kind, open-hearted way. Every time it happens, every time the grief comes up, every time the fear comes up, every time the old story comes up. So we don't need the old clinging in the same way anymore. Another little exercise, we talked about committed to stopping all complaints. Can we tune into intimacy? What would be a specific little request we could make, even though it might not be granted? I'd love it if you'd make dinner for me sometime. That comes across as a connection instead of, how come you never make dinner for me? I have to go make dinner because you never make dinner. No, just, I'd love it if you'd make dinner for me sometime. I'll tell you how my husband responds to that. That doesn't feel like pressure. That doesn't feel like push. That feels like, oh, I'd love to do something that you'd love. Thank you for telling me something that you'd love. I will make you dinner. Here's a smoothie. Great. Cold cereal is good. Yeah. Or what is a boundary that I could tune into my separateness and say, I really need this room to be mine. I need to know that you will leave when I ask you to, or whatever it might be. There's a guided meditation that is a really brief version of it on here. I've got the handout for it if you'd like it, from another gal, in terms of kind of working through some of those tough things. I love some of these scriptures that remind us there is an alternative to I will go, I will do. There are other scriptures that say, stop and stand still. And the outcome is the same either way, that the Lord will provide ways where we can accomplish what we need to do. He brings it together very beautifully here. Let us cheerfully do all things that lie in our power. And then may we stand still with the utmost assurance to see the salvation of God and for his arm to be revealed. That's a lovely integration. So we could look at the review. These are the questions we said we'd answer. We're not going to take time to do them. I hope we got close. But back to my little granddaughter. So sometimes I feel like if I'm not like everyone else, I'm a bad person. The thing is, I don't want to be anybody else. So what am I supposed to do? Eastern way of approaching her. What would it look like? Thank you, sweetie, for telling me that. I'm so glad you told me. That was really brave of you to tell me that that's what you were feeling. Let's just sit here for a minute and feel. What does it feel like to feel like I'm not like everyone else? Where do you feel that in your body? What does that feel like to you? I don't know, Grandma. That's fine. I don't really know either. I felt that way too, and I don't know exactly what that feels like. It sort of feels like I've got a wall up between me and other people. Yeah, that's what it feels like, Grandma. It feels kind of like that. Okay, what does it feel like to feel like I'm a bad person? Oh, it feels like I've got a darkness kind of inside of me. Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? Let's just sit with that for a minute. What happens to the darkness when we just sit with it? Oh, it's getting darker. Okay, let's sit with it a little longer. And we begin to explore some of those feelings. And little Jane begins to decide, A, she likes being with Grandma. Because Grandma listens. Grandma says, I feel that way too sometimes. And she also begins to realize, this isn't the whole of my life. This isn't the story of who I am. These are just feelings, and they'll go away. All right, I've given you additional information. I want to give you one more experience here. I hope this will work. It's quick.
There are moments that the words don't reach. There is suffering too terrible to name. You hold your child as tight as you can and push away the unimaginable. The moments when you're in so deep, feels easier to just swim down. And so they move uptown and learn to live with the unimaginable. I spend hours in the garden. I walk alone to the store, and it's quiet uptown. I never liked the quiet before. I take the children to church on Sunday, a sign of the cross at the door. And I pray that never used to happen before. If you see him in the street, walking by himself, talking to himself, have pity. You knock me out, I fall apart. Look at where we are. Look at where we started. I know I don't deserve you, but hear me out, that would be enough. If I could spare his life, if I could trade his life for mine, he'd be standing here right now, and you would smile, and that would be enough. Do you like it uptown? It's quiet uptown. They are standing in the garden, standing there side by side. She takes his hand. It's quiet uptown. Forgiveness. Can you imagine forgiveness? Can you imagine? No. Look around, look around. They are going through the unimaginable.
There are moments that are just too deep, that feel unimaginably hard. And yet you see the same process in this song, you know? Take a break, come back in. Take a break, come back in. Again and again. Go in the garden, go for a walk, talk to yourself, try again. It gets them through. There's a third verse that she doesn't use. There are moments that the words don't reach. There is a grace too powerful to name. We push away that grace that we can never understand. We push away the unimaginable. But there is grace, there is the promise of forgiveness that we can call on in the West, in the East, and everywhere in between. Thank you.